Welcome to this webinar about release orchestration, which title is, we try to do something which is very meaningful. So release on business demand is something that we will see in details, but companies are transitioning to on that very moment of the, on the DevOps trends. But which is very important is without anxiety, which means that we will try to keep things simple, although they are complex, and orchestrating many releases with many tools is something that we will demonstrate the control we have on. That said, we will go through an agenda today after a small introduction about that webinar. Who used to be Electric Cloud, today part of CloudBees, and his path into the his journey into the application release orchestration, an overview of CloudBees Flow, how it works and what we can achieve with Flow, what are the benefits, and we will just close with something about something else about the tool. It's not just the tool, it's also what we put around and what CloudBees as a company can bring. So let's start with that small introduction with a panel of the current customers that are using our solution for orchestrating releases. You see that there are customers all around the world, customers on all the verticals, although CloudBees Flow is especially popular in the financial services industry, but in other verticals, very useful. What do these customers share at the end of the day, or what did they face prior to CloudBees Flow? So we try to, I will not go necessarily through all these but the first one is quite obvious, I believe, for everyone. I have too many manual steps, and that often generates errors. Because it's not automated, my process is not reliable. Also, I spend a lot of time in putting together information so that I can make decisions, because I'm using a lot of tools. There are a lot of teams. It's sometimes difficult to put the time, people's time, and tools information together. So I don't go as fast as I would like to in order to be able to release. Things also quite popular. I'm not always certain of which application are supposed to be deployed and where. I'm not able to tell with certainty what artifacts, what versions, what applications are running currently on my platforms, because I'm not sure of the deployment. I'm not sure of the last deployment. I'm not sure of the different releases that are deploying on these platforms or environments. So there is a lot of questions like this that our customers were facing, and where we provided a solution that we will detail today, CloudBees Flow, which gives you the complete control of these DevOps processes. But before going into the specifics, let's go through a simple definition. This is the Gartner, the analyst company, who gave that definition last year in order to classify the tools and evaluate the tools. Application release orchestration, what does it mean? It's a combination of three aspects. The first one is quite technical and is deployment automation. How to deploy, to automate the deployment of an application towards, I would say, a target. We could say an environment, we could say a machine, a server, a cluster, or whatever it is. So it covers all the technologies. It can cover all the technologies. Deployment automation. I can automate the deployment of an application server, or a microservice on a Kubernetes cluster, or a COBOL application towards an LPAR on my mainframe. I can automate the deployment, the technical operation of sending, of deploying a bunch of artifacts towards the platform. This is the first aspect. The second one is what will happen during the complete process, the pipeline. Usually, we intend the pipeline from the developer commit, more or less, until the production, and what will happen after production when it transitions to operations. So all the activities during the pipeline, all the targets, so the environments that can be multiple. When I talk about technologies, my QA, for example, environment can be made of a mainframe part, a Unix or Linux part, some microservices running on the cloud, some virtual machines that I will provision at the moment when I need them to perform some tests. These are only examples. So environments and pipeline management. And the third aspect, which would be putting them all together, release orchestration, how to put all that together to orchestrate, to control, to have all the insights on the releases. So what applications and what versions of application will go through the pipeline? Will they go together? Will we control when they go and when the transition? How we will control that? If there are many releases, which one has the priority, and how it will be managed in the environment? This is release orchestration. So these three aspects of application release orchestration bring a certain number of benefits that are quite obvious. Since I'm automating, I'm faster. So I'm talking about velocity. I will be able to run faster and to go through my processes faster. I will improve also the quality because I'm automating things. I reduce the manual steps as much as possible, so I will have a better quality because my process is repeatable. And of course, I'm talking about having an overall vision of everything that happens, all the activities that are described in my pipeline, all the tools that achieve these activities. So I'm talking about governance. And since I start talking about governance, I could also extend to compliance, to audit, how to prove that I am compliant to a process, how to prove that my process can be audited at any moment. These are something that we will see that are built in the activities of our team. I take the opportunity because in that report that Gartner wrote last year about ARO, there is a small sentence that I find very, very interesting. Strategic planning. By 2023, so 4 years now from now, 75% of the global enterprises will have implemented a solution for orchestrating the releases, while last year there were only 20%, less than 20%, to have a solution today to manage the releases. What does it mean? It's quite simple. It means that it's not anymore a nice to have application release orchestration. Having a solution is becoming today a competitive advantage. So if I say it in another way to be maybe more clear, companies that do not have such a solution in the next 4 years or so take the risk to be out of the market because competition will have that kind of solution, which will make them faster, with a better quality, more predictable, and with an easier governance. So I found that quote very important in that context. So I take the opportunity to ask the attendees two very simple questions. Today, is your company having solution for release orchestration? And a second question, which is the same but for deployment automation, because we see as CloudBees that a lot of customers are starting with deployment automation. Some of them, more of them, have already a solution for deployment automation, but they do not have yet a solution for release orchestration. So asking the questions, the results, the outcome is, so are you using a solution for release orchestration today? Yes is 30%, no is 70%. This is aligned with the Gartner of last year. Last year we were at 20%. It's slightly higher now, 30%, but the attendance webinar is in the average of not having yet a solution for orchestrating the release at 70%. The other about deployments, this is more expected also. 57% do have solution for deployment automation. It doesn't mean that it's a complete solution. It doesn't mean that it covers all the technologies, but at least there is a trend of deployment automation adoption against 43% that do not have yet that kind of solution. So I believe that the attendance is a good panel, a good average of the industries, whatever the field today. So let's move to a little quote very quickly. I was talking about Gartner. I could have mentioned Forrester also, which is the other analyst which is most known on the market. Both of them on the analysis that they did at the end of last year for application release automation, CloudBees Flow is rated as the best solution in terms of strategy, in terms of implementation. And if we dig a little bit deeper, because I find it interesting, who is using these solutions? You have several profiles, and the analysis that they did is whatever the profile, so whatever the role, the release manager, the product owner, the operation team, whatever that kind of profile, Flow has the best grade according to Gartner. Same thing for the different aspects of ARO. You remember the three aspects: deployment automation, pipeline environment management, release orchestration. Once more, Flow is the highest rank, highest rated tool for achieving that. We are quite proud of it because it's a recognition of the work we've been carrying both in Electric Cloud and now in CloudBees. And we will transition to CloudBees Flow to give an overview of what it does, how it does it, and what benefits we can expect. We will go through some characteristics of the tools. I find that putting in evidence the characteristic make understand what is the idea we have as CloudBees when we implement such a tool, and what we want to achieve with it. So the first characteristic is we want to start fast and adapt. What does it mean? It means that when we implement that kind of solution, one of the most important aspects of adoption, of success of the project, of introducing a solution for ARO, is that we can measure the benefit very quickly. Measured benefit is something that is easy to define. is define some KPIs, define something that we can measure, and then see how we did before and how we do afterwards. We will go through that in details in a couple of minutes, but keeping on the description of start fast and adapt, start fast means that we can start using Flow, using the capabilities of deployment automation, of pipeline environment management, of release orchestration, very quickly, using the best practices that are inside the tool and that are delivered to start very, very quickly. Let me take a couple of examples. I have an application that deploys on a JBoss application server, and I want to automate the deployment of that application. I have the ability to start in, I would say, a couple of minutes, indicating where my JBoss is, what is its address, what are the credentials to extend, where my application is in terms of artifact repository or on a disk. And from here, in minutes, Flow will build the complete mechanisms that are necessary to automate the deployment. Same thing if I want to orchestrate a release made of a simple pipeline, made of 3 stages that are doing development, QA, and production, for example. I can start with such kind of pipeline, indicating the name of my stages, the type of activities, and start right away. So these best practices are mainly made for those companies that do not have yet neither a solution nor some defined processes to manage their life cycle, and allow to start very fast. But the second point, adapt, is also very important, because most of the companies that we meet do have something. Do have something means they have already some processes that are defined. They may be manual, but they are defined. They are already using some tools to manage the tickets, to manage the build, to automate parts of the test, for example. And what we want to do when I was talking about measuring the return on investment very quickly is also not changing what is existing. Those companies who have invested just to remain in-house, for example, in Jenkins, in CloudBees core, they have invested some time and some money. We will not change that. We will just use the Jenkins jobs that they have been creating for doing the continuous integration of their application. Same thing for those companies who have invested on developing automated testing with Selenium, for example. We will not change that, but we will use Selenium to trigger the tests that have already been defined and get the results back, as I said, to implement that complete process beginning to the end. So that adaptability is very important. We will see it in more details during that presentation, but that ability is very important to be able to interface with all the tools of all the tool sets of the process, so that I will use what is existing, trigger what has to be done with the tool, get the results back, and gather everything in order to build the governance that I was talking about. So let me show you a screenshot of that start fast, okay? Start fast and adapt. So this is the service catalog. It's some kind of self-service where, as an example, this is only, you see here, you have 22 catalogs. I have here some of the items of some of these 22 catalogs. If I want to build, for example, what one is the example, deployment of database on SQL Server here. So I can use that service on my service catalog. I just click on it. It will ask me where is the SQL Server, how do I connect to it, what are the scripts that I have to deploy towards that database, and this is it. From here, it will deploy automatically. It will manage the deployment, the automated deployment of that script towards that very database. Same thing for create an AWS application. As an example, I have to create an AWS application. I will give the information of how to connect to my AWS, what are the characteristics of my application, and it will create what is necessary to manage the creation, the automated creation of the application in Amazon Web Services. So this is an important aspect of being able to start fast, means being able to onboard what I have in-house, being able to onboard in Flow very, very quickly. About the adapt, so start fast and adapt, about the adaptation, we will see that in a minute in the real life example that I will show you. Just before that, let's go through a second characteristic, and we will build these three. We will build the three characteristics to have an overview. So after starting fast and adapt, a characteristic that may be obvious since we are talking about application release orchestration, but the insight and the control over the releases. Okay, so insight and control, visibility, complete visibility into the deployments and into the releases. So automated deployment, orchestration of releases. The detailed visibility also of which artifacts, which versions, which applications are deployed to the environment, or deployed to the resources, so to the machines themselves, to the application servers, with it's a corollary, but with a drift analysis. So what if I want to deploy a new version towards my QA environment? What will change? What is the difference between what I do have currently on my QA environment and the new version I want to deploy over there? Or I did an update on my production environment. Can I verify that my production environment is still aligned with what is supposed to do in there? That I didn't have any manual or local change on these environments. So it's really a control insight, and obviously a centralized access to the reports and the evidence from the various third-party tools in the DevOps toolchain. I've already mentioned that I will use, and this is the purpose of orchestrating. When you think about an orchestrator, he's able to do some things on their own, but he relies on the partners. He relies on the instruments in the case of an orchestra. This is the same thing for me. I will rely as an orchestrator on the tools that are already implemented or currently in the idea of implementing on my DevOps toolchain. Let me take some example with a use case, a typical use case of a DevOps toolchain orchestration and the interactions that I can define. For that, so this is a brief description, a high-level description of the functional architecture of Flow, with the flow platform at the bottom that will model, automate, and coordinate the different activities. On the top side here, the different use cases, the different things that I can do with the platform. And in the middle here, what we will just focus on the next couple of slides, the integrations, what we call the plugins. Okay, I've mentioned orchestrating the different tools. I've mentioned gathering the results and having an overall view of the complete activities. This is what will happen through the plugins. So if we spend a couple of minutes on these plugins, the plugins, a very important aspect, they are developed against use cases. And for this reason, they do not require any scripting. The plugin for JBoss, for example, allows you to do without scripting, deploy an application, undeploy an application, start the server, stop the server, ask for the status, and so on. I could say the same for all the application servers for which we have plugins. A database, you can have some use cases like execute a script, perform a backup, things like this. On virtual technologies or on the cloud, I could talk about use cases, create and configure a machine, create a cluster for managing microservices, deploy a microservice. So they are all use cases. And 99%, not to say 100, use cases avoids using scripting. So we don't have scripting. We don't have to write anything, to maintain anything. So we have less errors in the process. That said, we have two types of plugins. The first one that I call the tools plugins, which purpose is orchestrating. So the examples, we will see some of them, could be ServiceNow, open a ticket, ask for a ticket, wait for a ticket, things like this. Jira, same thing. Git, to get source code, but also SVN or other. Slack, to send messages. Ansible, to manage deployment or configuration of a platform. Selenium, Docker, since we have hundreds of them, we have a GitHub repository for the plugins, and I believe that the last time I connected, we had 380 projects on that repository. So we have a lot of plugins that cover most of the tools of the market. Tools plugin to orchestrate the tools. The technology plugin on the other side will take care of deployments, management, and infrastructure management. So the example I was giving, like create a virtual machine on the cloud, deploy an application on an application server, perform a backup on the database, send some JCL script on a ZOS environment, analyze a cluster which is running Kubernetes. These are technology plugins. So they will be used for performing the deployments and manage the infrastructure, because the DevOps process, this is something that we all have to keep in mind. DevOps processes are made of applications, so what happens to the applications, but also what happens to the infrastructure. Okay, this is something very important in the process to keep in mind, that we are managing both. So from here, I would like to ask some questions to the attendants. The first one is, since we were talking about technology plugins and Kubernetes and clusters, what is your strategy today in terms of microservices, containers, and cloud? And the second one is, what kind of technologies are you using? Is it mainly Windows or application servers or mainframe or microservices or whatever? So it allows us to understand, I mean, when I say us, it's us all together, to understand that we are living in a world which is complex, which gathers a lot of technologies. In some of these technologies, some are legacy, some are emerging. We are more or less, we have different behaviors in terms of an emerging technology, but when it becomes a standard, we have to think about moving towards. This is always, I mean, when you think about, I mentioned Jenkins, for example. It's not because it's home, but Jenkins, I remember as an IT professional that at the very beginning, Hudson Jenkins was another nice tool to perform continuous integration. Now it's considered as the standard for continuous integration. Same thing for microservices and containers. 5 years ago, Docker was some kind of experimental stuff that could be interesting, and everybody was looking at it. Now, Kubernetes, containers and cloud is something where most of the companies are going towards. So your answers about the strategy regarding microservices, already using is 23, which is also, I mean, we are on the average, we have 4 quarters already using, in transition, planning to transition, and no strategy. So as I mentioned, we have the pioneers who are already using. We have the companies expecting. They do not have a real strategy yet, but I would say 75%, the others, rather than no strategy, 76% are currently either investing or thinking about investing in microservices. The second one is, what are the technologies you are using? So application servers, Kubernetes. Kubernetes is something very, very trendy. Still a lot of mainframe. So we have some financial services, banking, insurance people attending here. Windows-based, still very, very strong, and others, I mean, a mix of other technologies, which means that we have to address, when we are talking about application release orchestration, everything. We have to address both mainframe, if you want to talk about the history and the time. We have to address mainframe as a legacy platform, but we have to address Kubernetes because this is the trending technology. And they will have to live together probably very long. So orchestrate the release means address all these types of technologies. So to take a very meaningful example, just imagine today you are working with a pipeline, with a process which contains more or less 4 stages. One is development, after that QA, and then you switch to pre-production and production to prepare the application. You probably, like most of us, have the source code in an SCCM system. You have a ticketing system, you have a continuous integration system, and you may have also a code scan system. Well, at the end of the day, you will generate an artifact. This is what is important. This artifact will be analyzed, the code will be managed, the correct source code, the correct process for continuous integration. Let's hope it works. From here, everybody will gather in a room or somewhere and say, okay, we have all the information. Did we go well? And are we comfortable to send to QA? Decision is yes. Okay, we switch to QA, where the QA people will do some tests. Same thing. After that, they will gather, were the tests successful? are we confident to send the artifact or the application to pre-production? Yes, we are. Okay, let's switch to pre-production. Performing some tests. Some of the tests, this is my example that I will show you, are not automated yet. So some of them are Selenium. Some of them are not automated. What happens in that case? Most of the companies, I send an email saying, I have installed the application in pre-production, you should test it. The person will receive the email, will process the email with his own priorities, and at the end of the day, we'll send you back an email saying, okay, I'm comfortable with the test, they are done, do what you have to do. From here, people will once more gather somewhere, take the decision, should we send to production? Well, it's not exactly like this because we have an ITSM process. That ITSM process asked me to open a change request in my ITSM tool. Okay, so I open my change request that will be looked at by somebody who may ask once more some information or gathering teams or whatever, and make the decision to transition to production. The platform will be prepared, the installation will be done, and I believe that the operation team will monitor the performance of that new application just to make sure that it's stable. So now just imagine that you have the same process, but you have CloudBees Flow. You will still, as I mentioned, we will not make a revolution on the way things are done. You still have the source code in the SCCM, still have the ticketing system, still have the CI. The difference is that the coherence of the information, the tickets, the correct version of the source code, the correct job will be managed automatically. You don't have to care. It is automated. And while the source code is analyzed, the artifact is generated in the artifact repository. Just note that Flow from that moment has managed everything. Okay, it has extracted, it has verified the ticket, extracted the source code, triggered the build, triggered the code scan, and generated the artifact. So it has all the information to decide to transition to QA. No need to spend time or gather information. They are here. They can be analyzed automatically, so I can make the decision. I transition to QA, where I will drive the QA test. Drive the QA test and get the results back. And since I get the results back, same story. I can make the decision because I have all the information to transition to pre-production. Same scenario, trigger the test that can be automated. Oh, I mentioned that some of the tests cannot be automated in my example of pre-production here. Rather than sending an email, I will use maybe a more modern platform, an instant messaging, real-time messaging, where I will receive a message on my mobile with the ability, so I will do the test because I've received the information, but with the ability on my real-time messaging system to send the results back just with one button. Okay, my tests are over. I'm okay. So since I have all the information, once more, automatically, Flow will open a ticket in the ticketing system and wait for the ticket to be approved. Once the ticket is approved, it means that it's okay to go to production. So it will prepare the platform, do the deployment automation, and then start the performance management system. So the big difference is that I spent on that slide about 1.5 minutes, while I spent on the previous slide more than 5 or 6 minutes because I had to describe all the activities. Now the activities are automated. So I'm going faster, I have better quality, because I don't have any unsure information. I have a better overview, so a better governance. What does it mean, a better governance? It means that I can know how my release is doing in terms of planning, development, build, test. I know I have all the information. You remember at the very beginning, start fast and adapt. I want to measure the ROI. You can't improve what you can't measure. Here is my measure, okay? And I have also a trend when I start to implement and along when I move from release to release. So the important thing is that when I show you the implementation, now you see flow, and this is the implementation. You remember all the activities. Here you have just a description of what happens in the pipeline, development, QA, pre-production, production, the different activities. I pull the Jira tickets, pull the source code, execute the Jenkins build, and so on. And I am driving that. I'm driving means that I show you with Jenkins to remain home, but I drive Jenkins, so I trigger the Jenkins job and I get the exact output console of Jenkins, so I get all the results back. This is all in my repository. This is the reason why I can make decision. Look here, what is my decision to transition from dev to QA based on? I have to make sure that Sonar was an actual scan and it produces no critical violations. What does it mean? It means that when I perform the Sonar analysis, I have the parameters with which Sonar is configured. I know that the scan here is a real scan because I have all the check here that are on for the analysis. So it's a real, it's not a fake analysis. It's not ignore here, okay, or none. And here in the properties, I get the results of my Sonar analysis. And I know from these results that I do not have any critical violation. So I have the information to make the decision. Actual scan, no critical violation, so I can transition to QA. And by the way, when I transition to QA, deploy to QA, and after that deploy to pre-production, and when I will deploy to production, what do I deploy in that very example? You remember that I was talking about technologies. Look at what I'm deploying. I'm deploying 5 applications that are part of that release. One is the OS central application, mainframe application. 2 of them are banking because I'm in a banking context. Front Arena and Marex, which are 2 banking applications. 4th one is a website. And the last one are a bunch of microservices that are deploying on OpenShift technology. So as I mentioned, whatever the technology, I can automate the deployment, but what I'm interested in is carrying all these 5 applications from stage to stage, from environment to environment, to make them part of my complete process. Development, QA, pre-production, production. Same thing for getting out of QA. I make sure that 75% of the tests are passing. Okay, this is just something that I decided it could have been 95%, whatever the figure would be yours, but the principle, the rule here is the important thing. I have a rule that transition to pre-production. And you remember from pre-production to production, I have here the last step, create a ServiceNow ticket. So I have created a ticket in ServiceNow, which is this ticket that I open now in my ITSM tool, ServiceNow. This ticket contains all the information about the change request, okay, description, task information, and so on. And this ticket has been transitioned, it had been opened as requested, and then has been approved by somebody in charge of approving the changes into production. And at the end of the day, what happened before transitioning to production here is that Flow has been waiting for CR approval. So service, it has requested the authorization from ServiceNow and then wait for ServiceNow to give its approval. So I can synchronize my processes with my ITSM processes also. At the very end, audit reports. This is something that more and more customers, especially in banking, financial services, health fields, are requesting to attach to each release some capabilities of audit report. So if I am asked for an audit, if I'm asked for a proof of what I've done, I can immediately, because it's attached to the release, I can immediately prove that I have configured the evidence. So my audit reports, if I go to the summary, for example, here is my summary report. It's attached to the release itself, and out of development, who gave me the approval? It was an automated approval, so it's my automation system. Because Sonar was an actual scan, I had no critical violations. Same thing for 75% of my test passing, same thing for authorizing production. It was made through the ServiceNow change approvers. So I can prove right away that my process is auditable and that I have the evidence of everything. Approval, evidence links, task duration, audit of the production, and so on. I have all the durations of all my tasks, all my tests, all my deployments, and so on that I have done through Flow. So coming back quickly to the presentation, so this dashboard, which is called the Release Command Center, shows you for one release the different trends. And should somebody be interested in digging a little bit deeper here, all these information is clickable. And if you click on the 11 incidents here, then you go to the tool managing the incidents. In my case, it's ServiceNow. So you drill down to the third-party tool, so you can see the data that have been used. So from here, we could do an additional overview of the control and the insight that we have. A complete insight on the release. So for each release, you have the status of the release and you have the different runs. It's obvious that a release is not a quiet river that comes from the beginning to the end. It's made of test failing, restarting, modification, and so on. So you have a control here on the different runs of the pipeline for your release. How did they go? By whom were they started? When they were started, and so on. You have also that's I left you the screenshot of what we've seen together, a standardized way to have the control over the processes with the description of the pipeline and the different activities. The dependencies also, what we've seen together is a quite simple thing. I mean, for stages, development, QA, production, we may have some more tricky situations where we have some different deliveries of different applications that gather into some more high-level activities that gather into a high-level pipeline. This is also very important to manage these kind of dependencies on the activities and the releases themselves. what I mentioned, what's inside my environment, what is the version of, in that case, the microservice that is in development, or it's another example of process, development, UAT, production. I have that very version. I have a drift here with a exclamation point. I have all the information of what is residing where in my different environments, on my target machine or on my target clouds, clusters, whatever the technology it is. And obviously, I mentioned it and we saw it together. From the moment I have all the information, I can have all the dashboards for audit, compliance, reporting on whatever I can dream about. So about deployment automation, here, the average time, the profile of the activity of deployments, the profile of the time to deploy and so on. The evidence until report, that's what we saw together. The inventory of a cluster made of microservices, the continuous integration profile of my different applications. So I have access to all that information, so I can do any reporting I have. Most of them, I mean, all the screenshots I deliver here are out of the box capabilities for reporting. You can add with no limit, should you have some specific needs. The data are here. It's just picking the data and presenting them. And just to finish on the capabilities in terms of microservices and containers. The smart map technology allows you to connect to a cluster and to do the inventory of the cluster and reproduce in CloudBees Flow the content of the cluster, so that immediately you can start with all this information. You have the information of the containers, the images, the versions, where they are located, and so on. So you can start managing the deployment towards that very cluster with Flow directly. So reading from the cluster and creating the structure in Flow to start working. It's once more, start fast. If you are working with microservices, you just plug Flow into the cluster and you can start managing the releases in minutes with containers and microservices. That said, just to close the characteristics, because it's also very important, we are talking about a tool that manages the complete process, that touches the production. And this is also the reason why in the history of Flow, we wanted to make the most reliable solution, whatever the speed and whatever the scale. We have some customers managing hundreds of thousands of target platforms with hundreds of thousands of jobs a day. And this is the reason why we have an unlimited scaling of the architecture. It's built in to be highly available, so you can have an unlimited number of machines load balanced to address the needs. And also in terms of fault tolerance and in terms of security, we are working with banks and defense customers. We have an architecture which is agent-based. It's something that we rely on for security, and we believe that the best level of security can only be achieved, and we can show that, can only be achieved with that architecture which is agent-based. For those companies who do not have the same security needs or fault tolerance needs, we can also work without agents, directly with the operating system capabilities like SSH or WMI, but we strongly rely on the security and fault tolerance of the agents in order to implement that complete process, unified, commit to prod DevOps automation. So this is what I wanted to share today about the capabilities of Flow. Just to finish and to conclude, we've been talking about a definition, application release orchestration, an implementation in Flow, but it's not just about the tool. It's also about what we can deliver ourselves and with our partners within CloudBees in terms of customer success. For those of you who already know CloudBees as a company for other products like Core or CodeShip, for example, this is something which is very important to us: customer success, training, professional services, partnering with best of breed organizations that can deliver some consulting also on DevOps. And it's not only customer success, it's also working with the right people. Okay, working with the right people. These are the persons, some of them, who are our strategic advisor, with whom we are working to define the best practices. I was talking at the very beginning. Most of them may ring a bell to you: Jin Kim, the Phoenix Project, Nicholas Fogren, which is the at the birth of the State of DevOps report, which used to be edited by Puppet and now by DORA. John Willis, who is our DevSecOps security specialist. Gary Groover, who is also star consultants in terms of scaling DevOps. So we believe that we are working with the right people, and we also have the right events worldwide. We are at the genesis of the DevOps Enterprise Summit, which is run by Jin Kim nowadays. It happened in London in June and will happen in Las Vegas at the end of October. And we also are the fathers of the DevOps World, Jenkins World. It was in San Francisco in last August, will be in Lisbon in Portugal in December, and in Las Vegas next year in September. So do not hesitate to ask Eliana or anybody about these events. These are the places where you hear the most advanced topics on DevOps and on application release automation. So that said, and I will just stop here with that summary. The idea is that we want to accelerate the software delivery with a better quality, and the client experience that we have, the client satisfaction, is something that we are very proud of. CloudBees Flow allows you to start fast, adapt, and have a complete insight and control over your release, while being enterprise solution that is completely flexible at any speed and scale. So from here, thank you very much for your attention. Do not hesitate to come back to us with any questions that you may have. I know that we already have some questions to address. I believe that they will be posted also with the replay of that webinar. Thank you very much for your attention, and at your disposal for answering any questions. Thank you. Goodbye.